I'd like to now introduce members from our next segment, which is the VC and Entrepreneurship Panel. Here are our panelists. I'm going to give a brief introduction to all of them, and then their detailed bios are available under the speakers tab at the site you're watching this event on. So first we have Kannan Muthukkaruppan, who is the co-founder and president of Yugabyte. He had successful stints at Oracle, Facebook, and Nutanix before his current venture. Kannan received an MS in computer science from the UC Berkeley and his BTech in computer science from IIT Madras, where he was awarded the President's Gold Medal for Best Academic Performance across all disciplines. Our next panelist is Raghu. Raghu Rao is a serial entrepreneur, strategic business advisor, and angel investor. He has founded and had successful exits with several high-tech companies. He is active in social entrepreneurship and community service and has contributed and raised several $1 million for causes such as education and healthcare of tribal children in India. Very commendable. Raghu has an MBA from George Washington University, an MS in computer science from Virginia Tech, and a BTech in electrical engineering from IIT Madras. Next, we come to Rohini Chakravarthy. Rohini is a partner at NGP Capital, where she leads the enterprise software and mobile technology practices. She was previously a partner at NEA and led investments at Intel Capital. Rohini has served on 14 boards. She is also a board member at the IIT Madras Foundation that you heard about earlier today. Rohini holds an MBA from MIT's Sloan School of Management, an MS from Case Western Reserve University, and of course, a BTech from electrical engineering from IIT Madras. Sashi Narahari, our next speaker, founded his company HighRadius in 2006. After its latest 125 million Series B funding, HighRadius reached unicorn status. It's now valued at over $1 billion US. Sashi holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Maryland at College Park and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Madras. Finally, moderating this panel is Karthik Thiruvarur, who leads investments in growth stage consumer internet companies at the International Finance Corporation. Karthik's it's an arm of the World Bank. Karthik's investments currently span India, Israel, and Turkey. He has been actively involved with the IIT Madras Foundation since 2018 and is currently Regional Vice President for the Mid-Atlantic. Karthik received a BTech in Computer Science from IIT Madras and an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management. As this panel proceeds, you can submit your questions in the Q&A window of the site you're watching on. The speakers will address all those questions offline following the event. Over to Karthik.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. We have a very exciting 45 minutes ahead of us with our esteemed panel. Rohini and Raghu are going to be sharing experiences from an investor's perspective, and we have Kannan and Sashi who have built very successful companies, and we'll be talking about their journey getting there. Mildly put, 2020, what an extraordinary year. The recovery, is an alphabet soup. Some call it a V, some call it a W, a K. I think we've all seen, the kind of disconnect between how technology companies have taken off in this period, while, you see a lot of Main Street companies struggling. And over this panel, we'll be exploring, what this meant from the vantage points of our panelists. We basically have two sections of this panel. The first section will focus on the challenges and the opportunities that the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of presented. and what the new normal is going to look like. And the second section of this panel will focus on those that are considering starting up at this point or joining, startups. What should they be considering as they think about these important decisions ahead of them. With that, let's kick it off with Sashi. Sashi, going into the pandemic, can you talk a bit about what HighRadius was doing in terms of opportunities it was working on, the challenges that you were kind of addressing, and how the last 9 months kind of with COVID has panned out, and what that meant for HighRadius?
Sure. So first of all, let me start by saying we call it like the April Fool's month of what happened. So for us, I think the pre-COVID was interesting. It was a very unique time for the business at HighRadius. I think we did our Series B, which was a very big round. So we had this big game plan put together in Feb, in March, where we were supposed to generate about 65% of our business this year compared to everything we did in the last decade. And then, of course, COVID hit, and we're like, what to do? So think about the first phase of the company in the Q1 pre-COVID. So we kind of did a few mistakes actually when COVID hit. So in hindsight, of course, but it's been a good learning. So we did the usual hiring freeze that everybody did. In hindsight, we should not have done that, and I'll explain why. Because that kind of put some deceleration of the growth that we wanted. Then the thing that I think we did well was that we immediately in March announced to all of our employees that everybody has a job. So we wanted to kind of drive certainty for all the employees. So that was very important because of the stress level. So I think that is a positive we did. We said, it doesn't matter what happens, you're all guaranteed a job basically for a good amount of time, at least for the rest of the year kind of stuff, because it's very uncertain at that time. So that's kind of how we reacted. I think in hindsight, if I go back where we are now, I think the hiring freeze was a mistake because it kind of, we kind of did some course corrections already. So we restarted the hiring now and so forth. So probably we're going to get 50% growth of the business still, which I cannot complain about given where we are, but that's kind of our learnings.
Great. A lot of stuff in there. We'll dive into it over the conversation, but turning next to Rohini. Rohini, could you talk a bit about your key areas of focus in terms of investments at NGP Capital? And as you started getting a lot of information through these 9 months as the pandemic progressed, can you also walk us through how that informed your own investment thesis as it stands today?
Yeah, thank you, Karthik. Hello, everybody. So great to be on this panel. So just to give you maybe a little bit of a background on what NGP does, so you have that in your mind, but when we discuss about how the pandemic affected us. So we are a growth stage firm, global growth stage firm based here in the US in Palo Alto, and as well as we have partners in Europe and China. We have about 65 active companies across 3 practice areas. Enterprise software, both applications and infrastructure. We do a lot of investing around mobile tech, around 5G and so on, and also around logistics and transportation. So about a third of our portfolio is in moving people and moving things. And a third of the portfolio is actually in China. So we had a lot of interesting experiences just going over the course of the pandemic and just trying to figure out, what is actually happening in each of these sectors. And the sectors have, of course, experienced very different things. The moving people part of the portfolio took a really big hit. So we are in companies like Lime, which is a scooter company, which had its revenue go down, 95%. And interestingly, they're back strongly. We didn't, you didn't know going in what to expect, when they would come back and so on. So we had a lot of we had to just be really adaptable and flexible in terms of thinking through what is happening on the ground and responding to that. And we'll talk some more about that later if people are interested. The logistics part of the portfolio has, of course, done really, really well because there's been a very strong rotation into people wanting everything sent to their houses. And so moving things has actually been a huge growth area, and many of our companies are beating pre-COVID plans on that side. In my own investing practice on the enterprise side, a lot of the question marks early on in the pandemic was first of all around burn rate and cash flow and so on. And Sashi, and we should talk about some of that in the coming minutes as well. On that side, so the initial reactions were all around, how do we make sure that we have enough cash to last 18 months, 24 months? So there was a lot of planning going in, question marks around whether enterprises would continue to buy. But I would say for the most part, the enterprise software portfolio has done really, really well. And a lot of that is because we've already been on kind of this flexibility journey, getting to the cloud and, doing things where you're boosting up and down. You're not putting a lot of fixed assets into how you build, and you're really trying to hone in on the value. And then the third area, which is mobile tech, also has been quite interesting because as we know, there's been a huge capacity upgrade on the networks and so on. And so I think the current estimate is that 5G got pulled in by about a year. And there was an interesting stat early on in the pandemic from AT&T. Like, I think in 1 week, they added all of the capacity of 2015 in 1 week in March or April. And you see that in, Zoom has 30 times the number of users that they had before COVID and so on. So infrastructure is going through a phenomenal upgrade right now. And those also present very unique opportunities. So I think on the venture side, I think the initial trepidation was about whether this was a knife edge in your letter soup, whether we would just go down to a Z, right? And then stay there. I think right now it looks like, I like the ulta tawa from Anand's presentation. I think it's ulta tawa or more like a U or a V, something like that. But it's been a very interesting year, like where it has demanded a lot of adaptability from our companies. But we've been in the lucky part of the industry where there has been capital available and so on. So glad to talk more about any of those things.
Thanks, Rohini. I think we all learned hysteresis in physics, but ulta tawa is what's going to stick, right? That's so much easier as an analogy. I loved it. You spoke about infrastructure and interestingly about the AT&T metric. In fact, I mean, I think we've all been very impressed with how infrastructure has just scaled, right? It's been the backbone on which we've actually been, working over the last 9 months. A lot of us who've had the, privilege of working from homes. So maybe that's a great segue to, talk about Yugabyte, Kannan. If you can speak about what exactly Yugabyte does, and through the first 3 to 4 months of the pandemic, how you'd actually seen, data from the infrastructure layer, right? And how that informed your own, decisions going forward. You had a fundraise through the pandemic. Congratulations, and we'll talk a bit about that toward the next segment. But would love to hear from you how you saw that scaling happen from the vantage point of Yugabyte.
Thanks, Karthik, and thanks everyone for having me on the panel. Pleasure to be here. Good morning, good evening, based on wherever you are. So yeah, I can maybe start by sharing a little bit about Yugabyte. Yugabyte is the company behind Yugabyte DB. So we are a database company building a transactional database that's designed for the cloud. And maybe one way to explain it is people are quite familiar with databases like Oracle, Postgres, MySQL. A lot of these databases fundamentally were designed sort of for scale up or more of a sort of on a monolithic architecture. But today, as businesses are seeking, elasticity, flexibility, geo-distributed deployments and geographic, data availability, bringing data closer to users, keeping the serving tier latency really, really low, there is a need for fundamental innovation in the database landscape to address this. Database, we are 100% open source, and just entering like this. You asked about what the context was entering into the pandemic. So we were about 4 years young as a company this January, and we'd broken into some mid-market companies that were already running and deploying Yugabyte at some pretty massive scale. And we were entering the next phase, you could say, of like breaking into Fortune 500 type of companies to use Yugabyte. And of course, the barrier to entry for a Fortune 500 kind of company with moving their application to a system of record database like Yugabyte is very, very high. It's not just the basic functionality, everything from encryption to backups to the security requirements are extremely high. So that is sort of the phase where we were of POCs with some big enterprise accounts. But if anything, we did not see any slowdown, and it's partly the fact that COVID is speeding up the digital transformation is in fact been a benefit. We've just seen an increased level of activity and continued interest in moving to an elastic database like Yugabyte.
Thanks, Kannan. Raghu, I guess my question for you would be from the vantage point of an early stage investor. What did you experience? During the first 3 months of the pandemic. You're also at that stage of the funnel where you see a lot of failure in companies. So are there any examples that you can share in terms of learnings that you had with your own portfolio companies there?
Sure. Thank you, Karthik. And just to give you a little bit of background, I have an advisory company called Harvesting Enterprises, where we help from kind of seed to harvest in all aspects, starting with strategy, execution as well as exits. So what I've seen is that there's been obviously the digital transformation, as Kannan was saying, has been kind of exponentially accelerated in this very short time. So the companies that have been able to kind of pivot into that, even if they were not in that space, have been able to take advantage. Like one example would be a company that was actually in cancer drug delivery platform, which is still a very good segment to be in. But they just to kind of take advantage of this pandemic situation, they use the same platform for delivery to the to the lung, where ARDS and stuff happens related to COVID, right? So it's an adjuvant to COVID vaccines, which is kind of the hot space now. So that is the kind of, I think, pivoting that has really helped some companies. Other companies which were in areas such as infectious diseases, which was kind of a poor cousin because those were not really felt. The need wasn't felt in North America, which is where a lot of the biotech funding, for instance, is. Suddenly came to the foreground. So I think a lot is about pivoting and also having enough runway to kind of last out, the famine time. If you're in one of those areas which is not in the where the money is pouring in right now. So I think those are some of the takeaways. But all in all, I think after the initial few months, everybody has kind of learned how to, at least survive through this period. If you're not, really growing, because if you're in the digital transformation and cybersecurity, telehealth kind of space. So.
Thanks, Raghu. Well, switching gears, we all have the benefit of hindsight right now of the last 9 months and seeing how the pandemic is played out. But I guess we all recollect, around Feb and March, the kind of decks doing the rounds, right? RIP Good Times, Sequoia's deck, which did the rounds in 2008. We all had that sense of, an impending doom of what's going to happen. And 3 months later, I think it started getting obvious that, there's a clear bifurcation in terms of how tech companies are doing. So just going back to Sashi, the points that you had made in terms of your own learnings, one thing I find particularly interesting about how you built HighRadius is, bootstrapped for a really long time. And then, done 2 rounds back to back, right? A series A and a B. If you look at your series B, it's almost like, a late stage pre-IPO kind of a round, if you will. Right, almost a series D or an E. And so could you talk a bit about, how you think about capital and how founders should be thinking about capital and dilution, specifically when they're building, enterprise kind of solutions.
Sure. So first of all, I don't think there is any single answer, but I can kind of explain how we think. So for us, it's about begin with the end. So when I started the business, I was like, what is the goal of the business? What are we trying to accomplish? So, and I'm a big fan of bootstrapping, and I'll explain why. So I think when I study most of the companies, there is a very interesting stat. There is a book called, somebody from Shell had commissioned a study about the life of companies. The average life of most companies is 14 years. The average life of a tech startup is actually 7 years. It was like a crazy stat for me. So our goal from the beginning was we should try to build a business that will outlast us. Not so. I think what happens with companies, again, this is my opinion, is they raise too much money too early, too fast, PowerPoint pitch to Series A, B, C, D, and then it becomes an exit game for the investor. So you end up becoming a line item of an internal rate of return. I know there are a few investors on this call, but this is my viewpoint. Take it with a pinch of salt. So our goal was, how do we build a business that's a win-win-win? I think about a company has three stakeholders. Employees is always number one for us. Employees, how can we create a platform for the employees that drive growth, which will create value for our customers? Because then if you create value for our customers, they'll pay our bills, and then the investor should get returns in the long run. So I think it's just like a sport for us. It's a game where you need to stay in the game long enough that your competitors, so you have to watch your competitors very closely. You don't want to be like playing a poker game where you have one chip and they have 100 chips, right? You're going to lose that game, basic math. So our goal was to keep staying and not raise money at all. But then when the game was getting bigger, the calculated math felt like, even though we are a better company. So we did our Series A about 2 years back or so, and then Series B last year, simply because we just wanted to outrun our competition. And then we would still not dilute the business a lot, but kind of, so that was our strategy for going from staying in the game to get to market leader, but then raise it with good investors, which are long-term investors.
And in terms of the pandemic, you just raised around before going into, the pandemic. Did the pandemic itself change any of your, funding plans of where, you were going to use your proceeds?
So I said we made some mistakes, right? So obviously I got an email from my board, both my board members of the Sequoia email of RAP. So I think the immediate reaction was, I would say like the month of April and May, maybe in hindsight, we'll still do the same because the uncertainty, you don't know what to do. So we did the hiring freeze, but we didn't have actually any churn in the business. Of course, we did a lot of things proactively compared to last year. So the churn remained the same, like maybe like 4% would be our churn, which is pretty low for enterprise SaaS. Nothing changes. I think in hindsight, I feel like you need to know your business truly, like where are you in the market and what are your customers saying? You need to look at your sales pipeline and just go with it. So right now it's basically like back to how we thought about the business in Q1 when we raised the money. And then there'll be some short-term friction, but for us, it's business as usual at this point.
Sounds good. Maybe get some reactions from, Rohini first and Raghu on the point you made, Sashi. They both spoke about, the next 24 to 36 months of, cash runway for companies. So Rohini, Raghu, can you share what advice you had for your portfolio companies going in and what the new normal looks like, for your portfolio companies or your investee companies from a cash requirement perspective?
Yeah, happy to. Well, entrepreneur is always right. So, so we'll posit that and start there. I would say that, I think the way to think about this is that, if you have the ability to run a business where you don't necessarily need a lot of capital to build out a product. So, the typical venture funded business is one where you have the classic J curve, right? So you have an investment period of some longish investment period that is, beyond an entrepreneur's ability to finance, just right out from the start. And you go raise venture capital in order to fund a business. And it's normally not fundable in other ways. Like you couldn't fund it yourself through services. You could not fund it by taking a bank loan, right? And this is kind of why you go raise venture capital. And so typically these have been product businesses that have had that, but not necessarily. Right now, a lot of times venture capital is funding distribution as well. It's not just product development, it's also distribution that gets funded. And so, as you know, when entrepreneurs in the audience are thinking about sort of what am I trying to do, I think it's really good to think about it from the way Sashi mentioned it, right? What am I trying to build? What is the natural arc of this idea or this company? When has the time come for this? And what is my whole product, right? And am I building something that is going to be a part of a larger whole that where I need actually, you can use capital in interesting ways, right? You can, of course, use capital to build the product itself, and it's a very risky way to build a product. But you know, some markets need that, and you need like an infrastructure company. You know, I think it's very hard for an infrastructure company to de novo start out. And have all of the pieces. You know, you need to have a source of capital to actually fund that initial product development, and sometimes the distribution. And then when you look at the competitive, you know, the industry competition as well, capital can turn out to be an advantage. It's not the only advantage, right? And it's not linear, as in the person with the most capital wins every time, but capital can be an advantage. And you need to also sort of figure out, you know, in your industry, how could you use capital to gain your own unfair competitive advantage, or fair competitive advantage, depending on how you're thinking about it. So I think, you know, it's very good for entrepreneurs to have that a little bit of that financial discipline hat that Sashi mentioned, which is if you're going into a period of uncertainty, you should cut burn back, right? I think, you know, it's the prudent thing to do. And in hindsight, you might look back and say, hey, that was not necessary, and you know, maybe I could have grown faster, but maybe that was the right risk profile that you wanted to have. So having these pieces in your mind on what am I building, what is the risk profile that I can tolerate, my employees can tolerate, and my investors can tolerate, what is my competition doing? All of those things sort of feed into how you come up with your annual plan, and how you execute your business. And I think from the investors' hat, that is sort of what we are trying to do as well. Like, we are trying to align the financial and capital profile of a company with the operational profile. Like, what does this business need to succeed, and when does it need it, and how can we be partners in that journey, right? So that's, you know, when you go find investors, I would encourage you to find people who are looking at you as partners in, you know, being partners in your journey. Not that you are a lottery ticket for a portfolio that they're building. Like, so you're not, you know, so I think your biggest decision when it comes to investor selection is to also know kind of not just how much money you're getting from them, but also what that journey is going to look like with them in the company. So anyway, I don't know if that helped, but Raghu, please comment on that as well.
Sure. To add to what Rohini and Sashi said, I think the key is that you have enough runway, because ultimately, if you can't survive, there's nothing else there, right? So to have enough runway. So one example, we had a company in the online kind of training space in the medical area, and they were also doing live, on-site conferences. They were doing very well until the pandemic hit, and suddenly, they have to shift completely into virtual mode, which the whole industry is doing. But it took them some time to get traction, to again kind of have these things going. So they, they had kind of stopped their fundraising and at the wrong time. So, so idea is to get some bridge capital quickly, and that's where, I think. Your network and relationships matter a lot, especially in the early stage. And so they were able to get enough capital using a bridge round, so that now they are in a space where actually their revenues are growing. So I think the key is to kind of, it is what we have, and how do you pivot and get yourself in a stable state so you can survive and be there when the growth again comes up, right? So that is some, but there are other companies For instance, in biotech, there are a lot of SPACs that have happened, which have a lot of capital. So if you find the right type of SPAC, which has a time, line where they have to, get out, then there are very interesting opportunities for combinations and things like that. So I think it's really about having the right kind of advisors, I think, ultimately. So.
Great point, Raghu. Thanks. I guess looking at the new normal, we're all working likely mostly from home for the next, quarter or 2 quarters. We're doing deals online. We are hiring online. And Kannan, I'd like to turn to you. After the fundraise, you've gone on a hiring spree. Can you talk a bit about, how that's been for you? And, Rohini mentioned, a fair or an unfair advantage, right? So while some companies are downsizing, this could be the opportunity to, hire talent that you're looking for. So can you walk us through that journey? And, we can go around the panel talking about their views as well as how, online has disrupted what they are doing.
Thanks, Karthik. Totally happy to. So in our case, we, around January, we had sort of started our Series B fundraising cycle. And these things take time. And in fact, our fundraising and the close, everything happened right in the middle of the pandemic, right? So it was a very, very interesting process. I would say, though, that 70-80% of the conversations had already happened pre-pandemic. So you could say that a lot of the due diligence, all of that was in pre-pandemic, but nevertheless, it's never complete till the line is the term sheet is signed and the checks are wired in, right? So that all happened in the pandemic. But fundamentally, I think a lot of it comes down to fundamentals. Is what you're building in a segment that there's a massive market opportunity? Do you have the right team to take this forward and keep going? And do your investors believe in the opportunity and see the long-term potential of the company, right? So net, it ended up not being too much of a friction. If anything, during the process, we decided to increase the amount of money we had originally wanted to raise, because all the signals we were getting from the bottoms-up adoption of the open source product in the community, and the POCs not slowing down, and just the market interest, it just made us firm in our resolution that we wanted to hire more, build more, and raise a little bit more capital. And our team size was around 40 around the time we closed the Series B fundraise. Now we're about 75 or so, added about 35, almost nearly doubled during this period. We haven't met pretty much 90% of these new folks in person. But I mean, thanks to technology that a lot of these folks in this audience themselves have been part of creating, it has been a fairly smooth process. Yes, it has its positives and negatives, but overall the productivity and efficiency has been phenomenal. If anything, we want to err on the side of caution of keep telling people you have to take the right breaks and detach from being online all the time. But no, it's been a good experience.
And any advice for those that are looking to hire during these times? How best to leverage these technologies?
For one, you mentioned maybe there's an opportunity during the pandemic, there's an opportunity to find talent. I don't know if that's really true, that the market is equally competitive. The big tech has really doubled down in terms of their market cap, their value creation. So if you're looking for talent, the choice that talented folks have is seems like it's a super. It just feels to me that it has become even more competitive. So I think, yeah, it ultimately comes down to what does the person want to do? Do they have the passion to go do a startup when high-paying jobs in big tech are quite available? So it's like finding the right fit, during the interview process, just making sure what drives a person, right? And the opportunities are plenty. So finding, as finding the right kind of people that feel like being part of the journey to create something, because all said and done, it's a roller coaster, especially in the early stage of a startup. There are a lot of ups and downs, and you need people that can look to the long term, right? And yeah.
Thanks, Kannan. Rohini, you had a recent investment during the pandemic in a company called Coda, and Raghu, you've been looking at investments. Any advice for founders, approaching VCs for funding at this point on, best practices? How sticky do you think is a virtual due diligence? Any lessons from that?
Yeah, I'll go first a little bit. So I think what I found is actually the due diligence process. Some of these things have become more efficient actually because of the pandemic. Although, if you already have a relationship like what Kannan was saying, pre-pandemic, and the chemistry is set up, it's a lot easier. But the processes in terms of doing things online have actually improved. I mean, you can see how well a lot of us are now doing on Zoom. I mean, people who didn't even use, these kind of facilities right before. So I think that part is actually doing well, but I think it's important for entrepreneurs to kind of amp up their online presence, getting onto all these. A lot of the events are free, by the way, because of this year is kind of the pandemic year. So it's a lot easier to actually get into online events and online pitching, forums and things like that. So I think people have to get better at presenting online in a crisp way, where you kind of have this whole Zoom vision of things where you can't really potentially use if you're more of a people person, it's a little harder to network online. But there is also easier ways to get into a lot more events. But while you're on an event, it's not that easy to network, because people still haven't figured out this rooms and things like that as much. So I think key is to approach knowing that you will have to do things more from a online digital way, and be prepared for that and put things up as much upfront as possible.
Yeah. No, I agree. So yeah, we've done a few investments now post-pandemic, and a lot of the diligence has shifted online. So we are a growth stage firm, so we would normally go into a company and you have the management by walking around philosophy, right? Just to feel the culture. Is there good energy in the company? Are people around? That part of it is very hard, right? Because all of these, I have had companies that have given up office space already, right? Because their leases came up and they said, we don't know when we're going to go back. Startup, this was like, let's get some cost out of the business. And so I think we've had to kind of rethink what company culture feels like, what does it look like, and so on. And the online alternatives are not perfect. Like if you just go read Glassdoor, right? You can read Glassdoor, you should probably do that. And if you're going to go join a startup, you should probably read the Glassdoor review anyway. But trying to figure out how it feels to work in a company is very different, and how to invest in a company similarly is different. I would also say that in terms of hiring, again, there are pros and cons. There's the world is flat and borderless hiring. So you could hire people anywhere. They work from home, and it could be a boost for women, for example, because a lot of, if you don't have to commute, and everybody's nobody has to commute. You don't have a second-class citizen type of thing where somebody's a remote worker and things like that. But it has also brought up these other challenges of, I think for women, especially in tech, I think there's a question mark on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. There are some things that are, good things, like, you could be anywhere, you could be anybody, and you can get your work done. So why should you not have a chance to do it? On the other hand, with schools going online and this and that, it's predominantly fallen on the shoulders of mothers to kind of be the teacher, at the homeschool. And so I think there are these other conversations on what does work-life integration mean? I mean, we're now all completely work-life integrated. Everybody's working from home. Like, so how do you make sure that this is, we go to a better place from where we were, and use this disruption wisely? I think that's one of the things we're also wondering about.
Wonderful. I guess as we're getting into holidays, maybe one last question in terms of, one opportunity that you're kind of working on either in your companies or, you would suggest for founders or those that are looking at startups to consider. And with that, we can wind up the panel. Thank you. I'll start with Sashi and go around.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly respond to one aspect because I have a contrarian viewpoint. So maybe it's good. And then, we are actually planning to go back to the office, and culture is really, really important for us. So I know that there is this boundary condition thinking. Before pandemic, everything was in the office, and now magically everything is online. Maybe it's possible, right? Who knows what the future holds? But my simple theory is, and we brainstorm with my people and culture head all the time. I mean, how you don't go to work for a paycheck is kind of my thesis. And the idea here is for the rest of our life, we're going to sit at home and do Zoom calls. And your only dimension of life is family and kids. I already told my wife and my kids that that's not going to be the only dimension. So I feel like the vibrant culture will actually be even more important after pandemic. I think as the world at large has become very selfish, if you think about it with time, right? So very nuclear families, nuclear individuals, independent. But I think the work culture, it'll be more demanding. So I've asked our people and culture head to bet on doubling down and improving the culture even more back in the office. So just wanted to give that context as a different point of view. I don't know if it's right or wrong.
Thanks, Sashi.
I think in terms of opportunities, back to your question, I can just give it.
I read a recent report, Sashi. It's very interesting that you mentioned that. Adobe's CEO Shantanu Narayan basically said something very similar to what you said, which is that the central offices become even more important, right? What will probably be less important are satellite offices, like where you had 20 people in an office. Like, well, you don't need 20 people in some small office somewhere. Maybe you can let people work from home if that's the case, right? I think but the central location, I think it is really hard to create culture entirely online. I think people haven't quite figured out how to do that. And I've attended some of the seminars on how entrepreneurs who've always been all remote, how they've done that. And there's a very, there's intentionality to that. You have to be very focused on how you work and what is important, what's not important. Like all the social gestures have to be explicit in an online model, like, so you actually have to know what is good and what's not. And people can build that culture if they are very mindful about that, right? But if they aren't, a lot of people are going to, once we have vaccines and Raghu's companies, do what we need them to do, we all go back to work. And I think, I think we will take learnings back. I think the fact that we've spent all this time with our families and most people will come back rejuvenated and really valuing, exactly as Sashi said, like, let us not waste time here. Like, if you're going to be in the office, you're here for a purpose. Let's do, kind of what makes a difference. And I'm very hopeful that this will actually be a cultural add. It gives you more tools to build very interesting companies and purposeful companies.
I completely agree. While this thing is, the timeline with which companies are going to come back to the new normal may be differing, but I think a lot of people do recognize the importance of that the human touch and the personal connections. If I look back, say you're a new grad relocating to join a company, a lot of your social context is also has an overlap with the people you meet at your work. A lot of my friends go back to my Oracle days, and it's just like, even though we've all moved on to many other jobs, those connections happen in the workplace, and I think there's no substitute for that. And while there are so many efficiencies in this hybrid model that will be continuing to stay in place in the new norm, but I think it has to be that hybrid model. I think we won't completely all go digital. That's pretty clear.
To add to what everyone else said, I think company culture is absolutely important. It's a non-negotiable thing when you're hiring, but you have to kind of build a little bit of it online now until we get back to where we can do physical interactions again. So, but to take it in a different direction, to go back to Karthik's question about what is interesting that I'm working on, Rohini was mentioning vaccines. In addition to the medical vaccines, I'm also helping a company which has a data vaccine. This is a blue ocean opportunity where people in cybersecurity mostly talk about preventive stuff, which is all perimeter security type of stuff, or reactive stuff. Once something is breached, how do we remediate? How do we move forward? What this company is doing, it's called Splitbyte, is actually coming up with a way where a system breach doesn't necessarily become a data breach. They do something like the Horcrux in the Voldemort Harry Potter stuff. They take the data and essentially bury it, randomize it, and bury it into the cloud. As well, you can also do it on-prem stuff. So basically, a system breach doesn't translate into a data breach unless you are able to compromise multiple systems and know how to kind of put it back together. And this is it's kind of surprising that nobody has addressed this. And this is a learning from the pandemic. Nobody really cared that much about the vaccines, right? But that is the holy grail. All therapeutics and preventive stuff. It brought the whole world has been brought to its knees, waiting for the vaccine. The similar idea, we can easily take it to data protection, in cybersecurity, which is also, as you know, there's so many ransomware attacks and also this cybersecurity, one of the key pieces is insider threats. And that goes to the culture, actually, the integrity of the people and, how easy it is to compromise somebody. Even so something like this, which is a distributed kind of, secret sharing model security kind of can work against, insider threat kind of things. And so I think it's important to learn other things that we have learned from the pandemic, which, as nobody ever thought, we all had our IIT 35th reunion last January. And suddenly I come back to the US and we are in a different world, right? So I think it's important to look at other learnings, not just about, the medical aspects only, how it has affected, like people being back home and how, environmentally, things have improved because of less commuting and all this stuff. So.
Thanks, Raghu. Great point. I think culture is one word that's kept coming up, and that's one thing we all share in common on this panel and otherwise through IIT Sangam. I love the hybrid world where we all can get together on a Sunday morning and do a Zoom, but also a reunion on campus is something we can all do with. So with that, thank you all panelists for a very engaging session, and over to you, Narahari. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists. I think we heard some very good information from Rohini, the venture capitalist, Raghu, the angel investor, and Sashi, who got funding right before the pandemic, and Kannan, who got it during the pandemic. So we got a variety of perspectives there that should help investors, entrepreneurs, and even people who are looking to switch to a startup or another job.